"Mom, we're just worried about you." That's what my daughter said when she sat across from me at the kitchen table. Not angry, not unkind, just careful. And then she said the words I had been quietly dreading for years: "Maybe it's time you start thinking about a nursing home." I smiled, I nodded, I told her I understood. But inside, something broke. Because what she didn't know, what no one ever seems to ask, was that I wasn't afraid of being alone. I was afraid of losing my life. And tonight, I want to talk about that moment. About why so many people are rushed into decisions they never wanted. And about the quieter, gentler path I discovered instead. My name is Annie. And what I want to share tonight isn't medical advice or financial planning or anything clinical. It's something more personal, more human. It's about a conversation that happens in families everywhere but is rarely talked about openly. The conversation about what happens when someone gets older and living alone becomes harder. When family starts to worry. When the word nursing home gets spoken out loud for the first time. When decisions start getting made not with someone, but for someone. This conversation matters because so many people are facing it right now. People who live alone. People who may one day live alone. People who have aging parents and are trying to figure out what love looks like in this situation. People who are terrified of becoming a burden. People who are terrified of losing themselves. And the truth is, society has taught everyone that there's really only one path. That when someone can't fully manage alone anymore, there's only one solution. The nursing home, the facility, the place where people go when they've run out of options. But most people never wanted that path, never imagined themselves there, never chose it freely. They were pushed, persuaded, convinced it was the only responsible choice. Told it was for the best, that it was safer, that family couldn't provide what was needed, that staying home was too risky, and maybe sometimes that's true. Maybe sometimes a facility really is the best option, the necessary option, the only option. This isn't about judging anyone who made that choice or anyone who lives in a nursing home or anyone whose family member is in one. This is about something else. This is about the people who don't want that, who never wanted it, who would do almost anything to avoid it, but who feel like they have no alternative. Like the choice is either stay home alone and risk something terrible happening, or go to a facility and give up everything that makes life feel like life. And what I want to explore tonight is whether that's really the only choice. Whether there might be a quieter, gentler path. A way to age that doesn't require surrendering autonomy. A way to get help without giving up control. A way to stay connected without losing independence. A way to live smaller but still live fully. Because here's what I've learned watching people age, watching my own parents age, watching friends and neighbors and strangers navigate this passage. The nursing home conversation often happens too fast, gets presented as inevitable before other options are explored, gets pushed by fear, family's fear, the person's own fear, before creativity and adaptation are even attempted. And once someone is in a facility, once that decision is made, it's so hard to undo, so hard to come back from. The apartment gets given up. The belongings get distributed. The independence gets surrendered. And even if the facility is nice, even if the staff is kind, even if the care is good, something is lost. Something essential. Something that can't quite be named but is deeply felt. The myth starts so subtly that most people don't even notice it's happening. It starts with small comments, small concerns, small erosions of confidence that accumulate over time until suddenly someone who is managing fine feels like they can't manage at all. It starts when someone forgets something, an appointment, a name where the car is parked, and instead of it being normal, because everyone forgets things at every age, it becomes evidence. Evidence that they're declining, that they can't be trusted, that something is wrong, and the person themselves starts to doubt. Starts to wonder if maybe they are getting worse. Starts to lose confidence in their own mind, their own capability, their own judgment. And then there's an incident. A fall, maybe, or a close call, or a medication mistake, or the car gets a dent and nobody's quite sure how it happened. And that incident, that single moment, becomes the turning point, the justification, the reason that everything has to change. Because what if it happens again? What if next time it's worse? What if something terrible happens and we didn't do something to prevent it? The language that gets used is so careful, so concerned. We're just worried about you. We want you to be safe. We think it would be better if. Have you thought about? And it's not mean, it's not unkind, it's genuine worry, genuine love, genuine fear about something bad happening. But the impact is the same regardless of intent. The impact is that decisions start getting made. Options start getting presented. Conversations start happening that treat the person as a problem to be solved rather than a person with agency and preferences and rights. I remember a woman named Margaret. She lived in the same house for 40 years, raised her children there, buried her husband from there, knew every neighbor, had her routines, her garden, her church, her life, and she was doing fine, managing, getting groceries delivered, having a cleaning person come twice a month. Her daughter called every day. Her son visited weekly. She had her book club, her friends, her space, and she was happy. As happy as someone can be at 83 living alone after losing a spouse. Which is to say, not without sadness, not without loneliness, but managing, living, still herself. And then she fell. In her bathroom, middle of the night, nothing broken, nothing seriously injured, just bruised and shaken. She called her daughter. Her daughter came, made sure she was okay. And that should have been the end of it. Should have been a scary moment that passed. But it wasn't, because the daughter couldn't unsee it, couldn't stop imagining what could have happened. What if Margaret had hit her head? What if she'd been alone longer? What if she'd broken something? What if? And the conversation started, gentle at first. Mom, maybe we should look at some places just to see, just to have options. And Margaret said no, said she was fine, said she wanted to stay in her home, and the daughter respected that. For a while, but the worry didn't go away. The fear didn't ease. And every time Margaret seemed tired or confused or forgetful, it felt like confirmation. Like evidence that she wasn't safe. That something had to be done. And eventually, after months of careful pushing, months of concerned conversations, months of brochures left on the counter and suggestions made and options presented, Margaret agreed. Not because she wanted to, not because she thought it was best, but because she could feel the pressure. Could feel her daughter's fear. Could feel like maybe she was being stubborn or selfish or unreasonable. Could feel like maybe agreeing was the loving thing to do. Was taking the burden off her daughter, was being responsible, so she agreed. She smiled, she nodded, she said okay. And inside, something broke. She moved into a nice facility, a really nice one, with activities and good food and pleasant staff and rooms that tried to feel like home but weren't home. And she survived. That's the word. Survived. She didn't thrive, didn't come alive, didn't seem like herself anymore. She went through the motions, participated in the activities, smiled at the staff, was polite and compliant and no trouble at all. But something essential was gone, some spark, some vitality, some sense of self. She lived another 3 years, and they were safe years, protected years, managed years, but they weren't really her years. They were years that happened to her in a place that never felt like hers while she waited for permission to go home that never came. This story isn't unique. It's so common it's almost a pattern, a script that plays out in families everywhere. Someone is aging, family worries, an incident happens, fear takes over, pressure builds, and the person, out of love or guilt or exhaustion or genuine doubt about their own capability, agrees to something they never wanted. And once the decision is made, once they're in a facility, reversing it feels impossible. Too complicated. Too much of an admission that the decision was wrong. So everyone tells themselves it was for the best, was the right choice, was what had to happen, and maybe they believe it. But the person who's actually living it, who lost their home and their independence and their routines and their life as they knew it, they know differently. They know what it cost. They know what was lost. And they carry that loss silently because complaining feels like being ungrateful when everyone tried so hard to do what they thought was best. The myth that someone can't manage on their own anymore, that they've reached the point where living alone is no longer safe, it's so often based on fear rather than reality. Based on one incident rather than pattern. Based on what could happen rather than what is happening. And that fear, understandable as it is, strips away agency. Turns someone from a person with preferences and rights into a problem requiring a solution. As the years passed, I've watched this same pattern play out with different people, different families, but the same trajectory. The same slow erosion of confidence. The same careful pushing. The same eventual surrender. And what strikes me is how rarely the question gets asked. What does the person actually want? Not what does family think is best. Not what does the doctor recommend. Not what seems safest or easiest. But what does the actual person, the one whose life is being decided about, what do they want? Because here's what I've learned. What most people want isn't that complicated. They want to stay in familiar surroundings for as long as possible. They want to make their own decisions about their own lives. They want help with the things that are hard without surrendering control of everything. They want to be treated like adults with agency and preferences, not like children who need to be managed. They want connection without smothering. They want safety without imprisonment. They want to age on their own terms, with support where needed but autonomy protected. But those wants rarely drive the conversation. Fear drives the conversation. Fear of something bad happening. Fear of being blamed if something bad happens. Fear of being a bad child or a neglectful family member if every possible precaution isn't taken. And that fear is legitimate, is real, is based on genuine love and concern. But it also needs to be balanced with the rights and preferences of the person it's about, with their quality of life, with their dignity, with what makes their life worth living. There's something else I think about often, the language that gets used in these conversations. You can't manage on your own anymore. That phrase. That declaration, it's so absolute, so final, so dismissive of nuance. Because what does manage on your own even mean? Does it mean doing absolutely everything without any help? Because if that's the standard, almost no one manages on their own at any age. Everyone needs help with something. Everyone relies on others in some way. Hiring someone to mow the lawn, having groceries delivered, calling a plumber when the sink breaks, that's all accepting help. That's all recognizing that some things are better done by others. And that doesn't mean someone can't manage. It means they're managing by getting appropriate help. But when someone is older, suddenly needing help becomes evidence of inability, becomes justification for total takeover. If they need help with one thing, the assumption becomes they need help with everything. If they struggle with something, the conclusion becomes they can't be trusted with anything. And that's not logic. That's not reason. That's fear masquerading as care. That's convenience dressed up as concern. Because it's easier, simpler, less complicated for family if there's one clear answer, one clear solution. Move them to a facility. Put them somewhere safe. Let professionals handle it. And then family doesn't have to coordinate care or worry about calls in the middle of the night or feel responsible if something goes wrong. But easier for family isn't the same as better for the person. Simpler for everyone else isn't the same as right. And safe at the cost of everything that makes life meaningful, that's not actually safety. That's just slow dying in a protected environment. The real fear, the one that's rarely named directly, isn't actually about being alone. That's what people say. I'm worried about her being alone. He can't be alone anymore. What if something happens and no one is there? But being alone isn't the actual fear. Because plenty of people live alone and thrive. Plenty of older people live independently with appropriate support and do beautifully. The real fear is deeper, more complex, more about identity and dignity and worth. The real fear is about being treated like a child, about losing the right to make decisions, about having every choice, every movement, every moment dictated by someone else's schedule and rules. It's the fear of no longer being seen as a full person with preferences and rights, but as a body to be managed, a liability to be contained, a problem to be solved. It's the fear of schedules replacing choices. Breakfast at 7 whether hungry or not, lunch at noon, dinner at 5, bedtime at 9, activities at designated times, everything structured around institutional needs rather than personal rhythms. No sleeping late because feeling tired. No staying up late because not sleepy yet. No eating at odd times because that's when hunger strikes. Everything regulated, managed, controlled, not out of cruelty, out of efficiency, out of the necessities of running a facility, but the impact is the same. Life becomes something that happens to someone rather than something they're living. It's the fear of losing small rituals that give days meaning. The morning coffee exactly how it's preferred, in the favorite cup, at the kitchen window watching birds. The afternoon nap in the chair that fits just right. The evening walk around the garden, the late-night snack in pajamas, the ability to be messy or strange or particular in ways that wouldn't be acceptable in a shared space with institutional rules. All of those small, personal, completely individual things that make life feel like it belongs to someone, those disappear in managed care. Not because anyone means harm, because group living requires compromises, requires conformity to schedules and rules, and those compromises are fine for some people. Are welcome to some people, but for others they're death, not physical death, but death of self, death of autonomy, death of the particular individual person they've been for 70, 80, 90 years. Another memory returns to me now, a man named Robert. He was 81, a widower, living alone, and he was particular, very particular, about his routines, about his space, about how things were done. He had breakfast at 10, not 7, 10, because he liked to wake up slowly. Liked to read the paper first, liked to have the morning to himself before facing the day. He had coffee at 4 in the afternoon, not 3, 4, because that's when he wanted it. He watched old westerns late at night, sometimes until 2 in the morning, because he couldn't sleep much anymore and those movies comforted him. His house was cluttered in ways that made sense to him but looked chaotic to others. He knew where everything was, knew exactly how he liked things, and he was happy. Or as happy as someone can be living alone after losing a spouse of 50 years. Which is to say not without sadness but content, still himself. His children worried about him being alone, worried about the clutter, worried about the odd hours, worried about what neighbors must think, worried about what would happen in an emergency, so they pushed. Gently, constantly. For him to consider moving to assisted living, showed him brochures, took him to tour places, kept bringing it up. And he kept saying no, kept insisting he was fine, kept wanting to stay in his space with his routines and his things and his life exactly as it was. But the pressure didn't stop. The worry didn't ease. And eventually, after a particularly bad flu that landed him in the hospital for a week, the decision got made. Not really by him, but sort of by him in the sense that he agreed when pressured enough, when made to feel like refusing was selfish. When convinced that his children couldn't sleep at night for worry, when guilt finally overcame resistance, he moved to a nice place. Clean, friendly staff, good meals, other residents to socialize with, everything his children thought would be good for him, and he hated it. Hated breakfast at 7, hated not being able to watch his westerns at 2 in the morning because his roommate needed the light off, hated the activities they thought he'd enjoy. Hated people trying to make him socialize when he preferred solitude. Hated having to explain his preferences and having them dismissed as difficult or unreasonable. Hated feeling like a child being managed. Hated every single day of his life there. And here's the heartbreaking part. He never told his children, never said he hated it, never complained, because they'd worked so hard to make this happen, had researched places and toured facilities and moved him and paid for everything. Had done it all out of love and worry and genuine belief they were helping, and he couldn't bear to tell them that what they thought was help felt like prison, that what they thought was care felt like abandonment, that being safe but miserable wasn't actually better than being free but at risk. So he smiled. He said it was nice. He thanked them for their concern, and he died 8 months later, not from anything specific, just from a kind of giving up, a loss of will. A resignation that this was his life now and there was no escape and maybe dying was easier than continuing. And his children never knew, still don't know, still think they did the right thing, still believe he was happier and safer. And maybe in some sense he was safer, but he wasn't happier. He was contained. He was managed. He was surviving in a way that felt like dying. This fear of losing agency, of being treated like a child, of having life become something done to you rather than lived by you, it's visceral. It's profound. And it's so often dismissed. Dismissed as someone being difficult or stubborn or not understanding what's best. But what if they do understand? What if they know exactly what they're losing? What if they've done the calculation and decided that risk with dignity is better than safety without it? What if their assessment of what makes life worth living is different from family's assessment? Shouldn't that matter? Shouldn't that be honored? There's something else that rarely gets acknowledged, the fear of no longer being needed, of becoming just a recipient, just someone things are done to, done for, with nothing left to give, nothing left to contribute, just existing, just taking, just being a body to be maintained until death. And for people who have spent their whole lives being useful, being needed, being the one others depended on, that shift to complete dependency is unbearable, is a grief unlike any other, is a loss of identity that's harder than almost any physical loss. One woman I knew, her name was Dorothy. She'd been a nurse for 40 years, a caregiver, someone who helped others, someone who was competent and needed and valued for what she could do. And when she got older, when arthritis made work impossible and she had to retire, she struggled with not being needed, struggled with not having purpose, struggled with identity that had been so tied to being useful, but she adapted, found new ways to feel useful, volunteered, helped neighbors, babysat grandchildren, found purpose in smaller ways, and that adaptation worked. Let her still feel like herself, like someone who mattered, like someone who gave, not just someone who took. But then her family started pushing for her to move to assisted living, because she was forgetting things, because she was slowing down, because they worried. And in assisted living, there's nothing to give, nothing to do for others, nothing to contribute, just being cared for, just receiving, just existing as someone who needs help with everything. And that prospect terrified her more than anything else, more than dying, more than pain, more than loneliness, the prospect of being completely dependent, completely without purpose, completely reduced to just a body requiring care. She resisted for years, found ways to stay independent, got help where needed but kept agency, kept finding small ways to be useful, kept maintaining identity as someone who gave. And she lived to 92, in her own space, on her own terms, still useful in small ways until the very end. And when she died, it was on a good day, a day where she'd helped a neighbor, made cookies for someone, felt like herself. Felt like she mattered. And that matters. That dignity in death, that sense of self maintained until the end, that's not nothing. That's everything. The contrast is clear when you watch both paths. The person who maintains agency and adapts versus the person who gets placed in managed care. The first stays themselves, becomes a smaller, older, adapted version of themselves, but themselves nonetheless. The second often disappears, not physically, but the person they were, the spark, the individuality, the particular humanness of them, it fades. They become compliant, manageable, pleasant, but not quite them anymore. Something essential gets extinguished when autonomy is completely taken away. Some light goes out, and getting it back once lost is nearly impossible. This isn't about judging anyone, not the families who make these decisions, not the people who work in facilities, not anyone. It's just about naming what's true, about acknowledging what gets lost, about recognizing that safety and comfort and good care don't automatically equal quality of life, that there's something else needed. Something harder to define but desperately important. Something about agency and dignity and self-determination that matters more than almost anything else. And here's where things shift, where hope enters, because it doesn't have to be either or. Doesn't have to be either stay home alone with no help and hope nothing bad happens, or move to a facility and lose everything. There are other paths, quieter paths, paths that require creativity and flexibility and willingness to adapt, but paths nonetheless. Paths where someone gets the help they need without surrendering control, where they're safer without being imprisoned, where they age on their own terms with support that enables rather than replaces. I remember another moment, another person. A woman named Helen. She was 79, living alone, starting to struggle with some things, mobility issues, memory issues. The beginnings of what might have been dementia but might have just been normal aging. Her family was worried, started the nursing home conversation, started showing her places, and she said no. Firmly, clearly, no, she didn't want that. She wanted to stay home, wanted to stay in her space, wanted to keep her life, but she also recognized she needed help. Needed more help than she'd needed before, and she was willing to accept that, willing to adapt, willing to change how she lived without changing where she lived. And her family, to their credit, listened, stopped pushing for the facility, started problem-solving with her instead of for her, started asking what would make staying home work, what would make everyone feel safer, what support was needed. And they figured it out, Not perfectly, not easily, but they figured it out. They simplified. Moved her from her house to a small apartment in a senior complex. Not assisted living, just regular apartments that happened to have mostly older residents. Same town, same area, familiar but smaller, easier to manage. Ground floor so no stairs, walkable to a few stores and a park. Community room where activities happened but participation wasn't required. Other people nearby but privacy maintained. They set up help. A cleaning person once a week. Meals on wheels for the days she didn't feel like cooking. A medical alert button. A daughter who called every morning. A son who visited weekly. A neighbor in the complex who became a friend and checked in. Not professional care, not managed care, just appropriate support. Just help with the things that were hard while she maintained control over everything else. And Helen thrived, lived in that apartment for 8 more years, had her routines, her space, her life, made friends in the complex. Went to some activities when she felt like it, stayed home when she didn't, made her own decisions about her days, maintained autonomy, maintained dignity, maintained self. And when she died, it was there, in her space, on a day much like any other day, surrounded by things that were hers and a life that had been hers until the end. The difference between Helen's path and Robert's path, between staying yourself and losing yourself, it often comes down to this. To whether the help received enables independence or replaces it, whether support maintains agency or removes it, whether adaptation is done with someone or done to someone, whether aging means simplifying or surrendering. And those differences, subtle as they might seem, create completely different experiences of growing old. This shift, this choosing to slow down instead of give up, it's not easy. It requires honesty, requires admitting what's hard and accepting help with those things. Requires family willing to support instead of take over. Requires creativity in problem solving. Requires flexibility in expectations. Requires giving up some things to keep others. But it's possible. More possible than most people realize. More possible than the nursing home conversation usually acknowledges. There's something else I still think about often. How small the adjustments often are. How what enables someone to stay independent isn't usually dramatic. Isn't usually expensive. Isn't usually complicated. It's small things. Simple things. Things that honor the reality of aging while protecting autonomy. Moving a bedroom to the first floor so stairs aren't a daily necessity. That's adaptation. That's acknowledgement that climbing stairs twice a day is exhausting or risky. But it's adaptation that allows someone to stay in their home, to keep their space, to maintain independence while accommodating limitation. Accepting grocery delivery or meal services or prepared food instead of cooking elaborate meals from scratch every day. That's adaptation. That's recognizing that food preparation takes energy that might be better used elsewhere. But it's adaptation that allows eating well without exhaustion, allows nourishment without the struggle of shopping and cooking and cleaning. Hiring someone to clean once a week or once a month. That's adaptation. That's acknowledgement that deep cleaning is physically demanding and maybe not the best use of limited energy. But it's adaptation that allows living in a clean space without the exhaustion or risk of cleaning. Allows environment maintenance without independence loss. Using a medical alert system. That's adaptation. That's recognition that falls or medical emergencies are real risks, and having immediate access to help provides both safety and peace of mind for everyone. But it's adaptation that allows staying home with the security of knowing help is available if needed. Simplifying possessions, downsizing, getting rid of excess. That's adaptation. That's understanding that managing a lot of stuff takes energy and creates clutter, and maybe life is easier with less. But it's adaptation that creates space that's more manageable while keeping the things that truly matter. These adaptations, these small adjustments, they don't diminish independence. They enable it. They make continuing to live autonomously possible by acknowledging reality and getting appropriate help. And that's wisdom. That's maturity. That's strength, not weakness. Knowing what needs help and getting that help while maintaining control over everything else. There was a man, his name was George, who made these kinds of adaptations gradually over about 10 years. each change small, each change in response to something specific becoming difficult. He moved from a house to a condo when yard work became too much, from the condo to a ground-floor apartment when stairs became a problem. He simplified his possessions each time, keeping what mattered and releasing what didn't. He hired help for cleaning, started having groceries delivered, used a walker when walking became unsteady, got a medical alert button after a neighbor suggested it. Each change felt like loss at first, like giving up something, like aging winning. But each change also brought relief, brought sustainability, brought the ability to keep going, keep living independently, keep maintaining autonomy. And looking back, he didn't see them as losses. He saw them as trades, trading yard work for energy to do other things, trading stairs for safety and ease, trading excess possessions for simpler living, trading some independence in small ways for maintaining independence overall. And he lived in his own place, making his own decisions, living his own life until he was 94. Not because he was lucky or particularly healthy, because he adapted, because he was willing to change how he did things in order to keep doing them, because he accepted help where needed and maintained control everywhere else, because he understood that aging didn't mean surrendering. It meant simplifying. That word, simplifying, it captures something essential about aging well, about staying independent while acknowledging limitations. It's not about doing everything the same way forever. It's about identifying what matters most and protecting that while releasing what doesn't matter. It's about focusing energy on the things that create quality of life and getting help with things that just need doing. It's about living smaller but living fully, living with less but living authentically, living adapted but living free. And here's what nobody tells people about simplifying. It's not just about aging. It's not just about necessity. There's freedom in it, liberation in it. So much of life, especially in youth and middle age, is accumulated clutter, physical clutter, obligation clutter, relationship clutter, activity clutter, all this stuff that seemed important but maybe wasn't, all these commitments that seemed necessary but weren't, all this busyness that felt like living but was really just noise. Aging forces simplification, forces letting go, forces reduction. And while that's initially painful, while releasing things hurts, what's on the other side is often surprising, is often better, is often clearer and calmer and more focused on what actually matters. The relationships that truly nourish, the activities that truly bring joy, the possessions that truly have meaning. Everything else falls away, gets released, gets recognized as unnecessary, and what remains is essence, is what's real, is what creates actual quality of life. A woman I knew, her name was Patricia, she said something I've never forgotten. She was 86, living in a small apartment. And she said, "I have less now than I've ever had, and I've never been happier." Not because loss brought happiness, but because simplification brought clarity, brought focus, brought freedom from managing and maintaining and worrying about so much stuff. She had her favorite chair, her meaningful photos, her essential clothes, her few cherished possessions, and she had space, mental space, emotional space, physical space, time to sit and think and be, time to enjoy small things, time to just exist without constant doing. And that, she said, was happiness, was peace, was life pared down to what actually mattered. And this simplification, this paring down, it doesn't require giving up autonomy, doesn't require moving to a facility, doesn't require surrendering control. It can happen at home, in familiar space, with support that enables rather than replaces, with help that maintains agency while acknowledging limitations. And that's the path so many people would choose if they knew it existed, if they knew it was possible, if they weren't told that the nursing home was the only answer once aging made life harder. As time moved forward, as I watched more people navigate aging, another pattern became visible. The importance of community, not institutional community, not the forced socialization of facility living, but organic community, natural community. The kind that develops from living in a place, knowing people, being known, having familiar faces and routine connections that create belonging without requiring conformity. This kind of community is what prevents the isolation that family fears when they worry about someone living alone. Because living alone doesn't have to mean being isolated, doesn't have to mean having no contact with other humans, doesn't have to mean loneliness. It can mean having the privacy and autonomy of one's own space while also having connection, contact, belonging through relationships and routines that bring people together naturally. There was a man who lived alone but wasn't lonely. He went to the same coffee shop every morning. Same time, same table, same order, and the staff knew him, the regulars knew him. There were conversations, small ones, about weather or news or nothing much, but they were human contact. They were connection. They were being known and seen and greeted. And if he didn't show up, someone noticed, someone checked. That coffee shop routine created accountability, connection, purpose, created community without requirements, created belonging without intrusion. He also went to a senior center twice a week, played cards, attended a book discussion group, not because he had to, because he wanted to, because it was enjoyable, because it created structure to his week, because it brought him into contact with others in predictable, manageable ways. And when he wasn't there, people noticed. People asked about him. People cared. That center membership created another layer of community, another web of connection, another place where he belonged and was known, and he had neighbors in his apartment building. People he saw in the hallway, chatted with by the mailboxes, held doors for, small interactions, nothing deep, but they added up. They created familiar faces. Created the sense of being part of something, of living somewhere among others rather than existing in isolation. And when he was sick for a week, neighbors noticed, knocked on his door, checked if he needed anything. That neighboring, that casual proximity, it mattered, created care without formality, created looking out for each other naturally. All of that together, the coffee shop, the senior center, the neighbors, created community, created connection, created accountability and belonging and mattering, created protection against the isolation that family feared. But it didn't require giving up independence, didn't require institutional living, didn't require surrendering autonomy. It just required showing up, being present, being part of places, being a person among other people, living in community without living in a facility. And this kind of community is available almost everywhere, in small towns and big cities, in senior complexes and regular neighborhoods, through senior centers and libraries and churches and coffee shops and parks and anywhere people gather regularly. It just requires participation, requires leaving the house, requires routine, requires showing up even when it would be easier to stay home, requires effort. But effort that creates connection, that prevents isolation, that maintains quality of life, that enables aging in place without aging in isolation. Another memory surfaces now. A woman named Betty. She was a widow, lived alone in a small house, and she was intentional about community, intentional about creating connection. She joined a church even though she wasn't particularly religious, because the church had activities, had a community meal once a month, had people who checked on members, had built-in connection. She joined a book club at the library, met every other Tuesday, same people, regular commitment, conversation and connection built around reading. She volunteered at a food bank, one morning a week. Not because she needed purpose, though that was part of it, because it brought her into contact with others, with volunteers, with the people they served, with humanity in its various forms, and she walked every day, same route, same time, and on that route she saw people, other walkers, people on their porches, people doing yard work, and she greeted them, stopped sometimes to chat, became a familiar presence, a known person, someone who belonged in that neighborhood, someone whose absence would be noticed. And when she was sick and didn't walk for a few days, neighbors she barely knew knocked on her door, asked if she was okay, offered help. That walking routine had created connection she didn't even realize existed until she needed it. All of that together created a life, a connected life, a life with purpose and routine and belonging and mattering, a life that was hers, lived in her space on her terms with her routines. But also a life that was protected against the isolation and loneliness that come from disconnection. She wasn't isolated. She was known. She was part of various communities. She had people who would notice if she disappeared, who would check on her, who cared, not out of obligation, out of connection, out of shared humanity, out of the bonds created by showing up consistently in shared spaces. And this is what family needs to understand when they worry about someone living alone. That living alone and being isolated are not the same thing. that independence and loneliness are not synonymous. That someone can have their own space, their own autonomy, their own life while also being deeply connected to community, to other people, to the world around them. The key is structure, routine, regular participation in places and activities that bring people together, showing up, being present, being part of something. And those things are possible for most people, are choices that can be made, are ways of living that prevent isolation without requiring institutionalization. There's something else about community that matters. It doesn't have to be same-age community. Doesn't have to be only with other old people. Can be intergenerational, can involve young people, children, families. And often those intergenerational connections are the most life-giving, the most energizing, the most meaningful. A man I knew, his name was Frank, he volunteered at an elementary school. Helped kids with reading, 2 afternoons a week, and those afternoons were what he looked forward to, what gave his week structure, what made him feel useful and needed and connected to life still unfolding. Those children kept him young, kept him engaged, kept him learning and adapting and remaining flexible. And when he got sick and couldn't volunteer for a while, the kids made him cards, asked about him, missed him. That mattering, that being missed, that being part of kids' lives, it was profound. Was meaningful, was life-giving. He also had a friendship with a neighbor's family, the couple next door. They had young children, and Frank became an honorary grandparent, was invited to birthday parties, was asked to babysit sometimes, helped with homework, fixed broken toys, was present in their lives in ways that mattered. And they were present in his life in ways that mattered, checked on him, shoveled his walk in winter, brought him soup when he was sick, invited him for holidays, made him part of their family even though he wasn't blood. That intergenerational connection, that being part of a young family's life while also being supported by them, it was reciprocal, was mutual, was relationship, not caregiving, was community, not service. And this is what community can be, can look like, doesn't have to be formal, doesn't have to be programs or organizations. Can be neighbors and friends, and the people whose lives intersect with yours through proximity and choice and showing up. Can be organic, natural, built over time through consistent presence and genuine care. And that kind of community, that woven together network of connection, it's what makes aging in place not just possible but good. Not just survivable but life-giving. The institutional version of community, the kind that exists in nursing homes and assisted living, it's different. It's programmed, scheduled, organized, activities at set times, social interaction as agenda item, friendships as assignment, and for some people that works. For some people, having it organized is helpful, is easier than creating it themselves, is better than isolation. But for others, it feels forced, feels artificial, feels like community theater instead of actual community, like going through motions instead of authentic connection. And recognizing the difference matters. Recognizing that community can exist outside institutions, can be built through choice and routine and participation, can be authentic and life-giving without being managed, that matters. Because what people need as they age isn't just safety, isn't just 3 meals a day and someone to check on them. They need belonging, need mattering, need connection, need to be part of something, need to be known and seen and valued. And those needs can be met in many ways. Some people meet them in facilities. But many people meet them through the communities they're already part of, through the places they go and the people they see and the routines they maintain. And supporting that, enabling that, protecting that, it's supporting independence in the fullest sense. It's enabling quality of life. It's honoring what makes life worth living. And then, sometime later, comes a shift that's perhaps the hardest but also the most necessary. The shift into acceptance, into making peace with aging itself, into recognizing that limitations are real and growing and won't reverse, that the body will continue to change and weaken and fail in various ways, that capabilities will diminish, that losses will accumulate, that aging is happening and will keep happening and there's no stopping it, and that fighting it, resisting it, pretending it's not happening, that doesn't serve anyone. What serves is acceptance, is adaptation, is finding new ways to live well within changing parameters. This acceptance isn't giving up, isn't resignation, isn't surrender to decline. It's something else, something more nuanced. It's acknowledging reality while choosing how to respond to it. It's accepting what can't be changed while protecting what can. It's making peace with needing help while maintaining agency over how that help is given. It's letting go of shame about what's no longer possible while holding on to pride in what remains possible. It's grief and adaptation existing simultaneously. It's loss and growth not being opposites but companions. There's a particular kind of shame that comes with aging, with needing help, with not being able to do things that used to be effortless, with asking for assistance, with admitting weakness, with being the one who needs instead of the one who provides. And that shame is real and powerful and deeply rooted in cultural messages about independence and productivity and value, rooted in lifelong patterns of being the capable one, rooted in fear of being a burden, of being too much, of asking for more than one deserves. But that shame isn't serving anyone, isn't protecting anything, isn't making anything better. It's just creating suffering, creating isolation, creating refusal to ask for help even when help is needed, creating dangerous situations where someone struggles alone rather than accepting support. And releasing that shame, making peace with needing help, recognizing that human beings are interdependent at all ages and needing help isn't moral failing, that's liberation. That's wisdom. That's the beginning of aging well. A woman named Ellen, she struggled with this shame for years, struggled with needing help, with admitting she couldn't do everything herself anymore, with asking her children for support. She'd rather struggle, rather exhaust herself, rather risk falling or hurting herself, than ask. Then admit need, then be what she saw as a burden, and her children wanted to help, wanted to be asked, wanted to support her, but she wouldn't let them, wouldn't accept help, wouldn't be vulnerable enough to say, I need you. And then she fell, bad fall, broke her hip, ended up in the hospital, then rehab, then faced the question of where to go after. And her children said, come live with us. Come stay with us while you recover. Let us help. And she had no choice, couldn't refuse. Couldn't maintain the pretense of independence, had to accept help, had to be dependent, had to let them care for her, and something unexpected happened. Something that changed everything. She discovered it wasn't terrible, wasn't humiliating, wasn't what she'd feared. Her children wanted to help, were happy to help, didn't resent it or see her as a burden. They were glad to be able to care for her after all the years she'd cared for them. And being cared for, being helped, being supported, it wasn't shameful. It was human, it was love, it was what families do for each other. And releasing the shame, accepting the help, it brought peace. Brought closeness with her children she'd been blocking with her stubborn independence. Brought relief from the exhausting effort of pretending to be fine when she wasn't. She recovered, moved back to her own place eventually, but changed. She could ask for help now, could accept it without shame. Could recognize that independence wasn't doing everything alone. It was making choices about her life with support where needed. And that reframing, that shift from shame to acceptance, it changed everything. Changed how she aged, changed her relationship with her children, changed her quality of life. And this acceptance, this making peace with needing help, it's essential for aging well, because everyone will need help eventually. Everyone's capabilities will diminish. Everyone will face the choice of accepting support or struggling alone. And choosing support, choosing to let people help, choosing to ask for what's needed, that's not weakness. That's wisdom. That's recognizing reality and responding intelligently. That's valuing relationship and connection over the illusion of complete independence. That's being human. Another part of acceptance is redefining what independence means. Because the cultural definition, the standard understanding, it doesn't work for aging. The idea that independence means doing absolutely everything yourself, without help from anyone, that's not independence. That's isolation masquerading as strength. Real independence at any age is having agency, having choice, having control over one's own life and decisions. It's not about capability. It's about autonomy. Someone can need help with many things and still be independent if they're the ones deciding what help they need, who provides it, how it's provided, when it happens. If they're maintaining control over their own life even while accepting support, that's independence. Someone who does everything themselves but out of shame or stubbornness rather than preference. Someone who's isolated and exhausted and struggling because they won't accept help. They're not independent. They're trapped by pride, trapped by fear, trapped by a definition of independence that doesn't serve them. Real independence looks like this: making decisions about one's own life, choosing where to live, choosing daily routines, choosing when to wake up and when to go to sleep, choosing what to eat and when, choosing activities and social contact, choosing how to spend time, choosing what matters, and maintaining those choices while accepting support with the things that are hard or impossible. That's independence. That's autonomy. That's agency. And it's possible even with significant limitations, even with substantial need for help, as long as the help enables choices rather than replaces them. As long as support maintains agency rather than removes it. A man named Walter understood this. He had significant health issues, needed help with many things, but he was clear about his preferences, about how he wanted help given, about maintaining control over his days. He hired help for cleaning and meal preparation, but he specified exactly how he wanted things done, what foods he liked, what schedule he preferred, what standards he had. He accepted help but directed it, made it serve his preferences rather than adapting to what was easiest for helpers. And that directing, that maintaining control even while needing help, that preserved his independence, preserved his agency, preserved his sense of self. He lived in his own place, made his own decisions, structured his days as he chose, and died there, in his space, on his terms, having lived his final years with dignity and autonomy intact despite needing significant support. And that's what's possible. That's what acceptance enables. Not settling for managed care, but creating supported independence, accepting help while maintaining agency, needing assistance while remaining autonomous. This acceptance also includes grief, real grief, for what's lost, for what's no longer possible, for the body that fails, for the capabilities that diminish, for the life that was and is no more. That grief is legitimate, is real, is worthy of acknowledgement. And allowing it, feeling it, processing it, that's part of aging well. Denying it, pretending it doesn't exist, staying artificially positive, that doesn't serve anyone. The losses are real. The grief is appropriate. And honoring it, making space for it, that's healthy. That's human. But grief and adaptation can coexist, can both be true. Someone can mourn what's lost while also finding new ways to live, can feel sad about limitations while also creating quality of life within them, can carry loss while also experiencing joy. The human heart is big enough for all of it, for grief and gratitude, for loss and adaptation, for sadness and peace. And aging well means making space for all of it, means allowing the complexity, means not forcing artificial positivity or drowning in despair, but living somewhere in between, living with honesty about what's hard while also protecting what's good. There's something else about acceptance that matters. It's not a one-time thing. It's not a decision made once that stays made. It's ongoing, continuous. Every loss requires new acceptance. Every change requires new adaptation. Every diminishment requires new grieving and new peacemaking. Aging doesn't happen all at once. It's gradual. It's accumulating changes that each require their own reckoning. And so acceptance isn't destination. It's practice. It's daily choice. It's repeated letting go and repeated claiming of what remains. And some days are harder than others. Some losses hurt more. Some changes feel impossible to accept. And that's okay. That's human. That's the reality of aging in a body that's breaking down while the person inside still feels essentially the same. There's grief in that disconnect, in feeling young while looking old, in wanting to do what the body won't cooperate with anymore, in the gap between internal experience and external reality. And that grief deserves space, deserves acknowledgement, deserves compassion. But even in the hardest moments, even in the deepest grief, there's still choice, still agency, still the ability to decide how to respond, how to adapt, how to create quality of life within limitations, how to protect dignity and autonomy even as capabilities diminish. And that choice, that agency, that's what matters most. That's what makes aging on one's own terms possible. That's what the nursing home conversation often takes away. That's what needs protecting above almost everything else. As all of these reflections come together, as all of these threads weave into understanding, what emerges is a picture of aging that's different from the cultural narrative. A picture where growing old doesn't mean automatic institutionalization, where needing help doesn't mean surrendering control, where limitations don't equal loss of agency, where simplification creates freedom, where community prevents isolation, where acceptance enables adaptation, where dignity persists, where choice remains. Where life, even diminished life, can still be good, still be meaningful, still be worth living, still be one's own. And that picture, that possibility, it needs to be offered, needs to be discussed, needs to be presented as option when families sit down to have the conversation about what happens next. Because too often the nursing home is presented as the only answer, as inevitable, as what responsible people do. And that's not true. It's one option, but there are others, quieter options. Options that require more creativity and flexibility, but preserve more autonomy. Options that honor the person's preferences and values and desires for how they want to age. And those options deserve consideration, deserve exploration, deserve to be tried before the more drastic measure of institutionalization. This doesn't mean nursing homes are always wrong. Doesn't mean they're never the right choice. Sometimes they are. Sometimes someone's needs exceed what can be provided at home, even with support. Sometimes the person truly prefers facility living. Sometimes family circumstances make other options impossible. This isn't black and white, isn't simple, isn't one size fits all. It's about having real conversations, about exploring all options, about prioritizing the person's preferences, about trying the less restrictive paths first, about not rushing to the most dramatic solution before other possibilities are exhausted. And it's about timing. About recognizing that needs change gradually, that there are many steps between complete independence and total institutional care, that intermediate solutions exist, that adaptation can happen in stages, that small supports can be added over time as needed rather than jumping immediately to comprehensive managed care, that someone can age in place with increasing help rather than being moved to a facility at the first sign of difficulty. This gradual approach, this incremental increase in support while maintaining agency, it's kinder, it's gentler, it's more respectful. It allows the person to adapt at their own pace, to maintain control for longer, to protect autonomy even as needs increase. And it often works, often allows someone to age at home for much longer than anyone expected, sometimes until death, sometimes avoiding institutional care entirely. Not always, but often enough that it's worth trying, worth prioritizing, worth advocating for. And for families, this approach requires more effort, requires coordination, requires creativity, requires flexibility, requires accepting imperfection and risk, requires trusting the person to know what's best for themselves even when that's scary, requires supporting their choices even when different choices would feel safer, requires balancing genuine concern with respect for autonomy, requires resisting the urge to take over even when taking over would be easier. All of that is hard, really hard, but it's also love, real love, the kind that respects and honors rather than controls and manages, the kind that empowers rather than diminishes, the kind that maintains relationship as adults rather than reverting to parent-child dynamics. And that kind of love, even though harder, creates better outcomes, creates maintained dignity, creates quality of life, creates aging on one's own terms. There's a moment I want to return to. The moment that started this whole conversation. The moment my daughter sat across from me and said those words. Maybe it's time you start thinking about a nursing home. And I smiled and nodded and said I understood. But inside, something broke. Because what she didn't know, what she didn't ask, was what I actually wanted. What would make me feel safe and supported without taking away my life? What would honor my preferences and values and desires for how I want to age? And after that conversation, after sitting with that broken feeling, after giving myself time to process and grieve and think, I had another conversation with her. A different conversation. One where I didn't just smile and nod. One where I was honest, where I told her my fears, where I explained what a nursing home would mean to me, where I articulated what I actually wanted. And she listened, really listened. And then we problem-solved together, figured out what support I needed. What would make everyone feel safer? What adaptations would let me stay in my space while addressing the concerns? And we found a path, not perfect, not easy, but a path. One that honored my preferences while also acknowledging reality. One that added support without taking away autonomy. One that let me keep my life while addressing the legitimate concerns. And that path has worked. For years now, I'm still here, still in my space, still making my own decisions, still living my life. With more help than before, with adjustments and adaptations, with simplification and community and acceptance of limitations, but still myself, still autonomous, still aging on my own terms. And when I can't do this anymore, when my needs exceed what can be managed at home, I'll know, I'll recognize it, and I'll make different choices then. But not before, not prematurely, not out of fear, not rushed, on my terms, in my time, when it's actually necessary rather than just easier. And this is what I want for everyone. This agency, this respect, this opportunity to age according to one's own values and preferences, this protection of autonomy even as capabilities diminish, this balance between support and independence, this possibility of staying home, staying yourself, staying in control for as long as truly possible, and longer than most people think is possible. Because with creativity and support and community and acceptance, so much is possible. So much more than the nursing home conversation usually acknowledges. Now, if someone has stayed with me through this entire journey, through all these reflections and stories and explorations of aging and autonomy, and what makes life worth living, that means something. That means this resonates. Means maybe there's someone in life right now facing these questions. Maybe a parent, maybe oneself, maybe a loved one, maybe someone trying to figure out what love and support look like when aging makes life harder. And if that's true, if this conversation has stirred something or named something or offered something helpful, maybe there's value in saying so, in commenting, in sharing what it brought up. Something like, this is my story too, or I'm trying to figure this out, or I wish someone had told me this sooner, or just thank you for these words. Because sometimes saying it, even to strangers, makes it real, makes it less lonely, makes it the beginning of different conversations with the people in life who matter. The closing truth is this: growing old is not failure, is not something to be ashamed of, is not evidence of weakness or diminishment of worth. It's the privilege of having lived long, the reward for surviving, the opportunity to experience life from a perspective only time provides. And it can be done with dignity, with autonomy, with agency intact, with life still belonging to the person living it, with choices still mattering, with preferences still honored, with space and routines and belongings and control over days still protected. Not perfectly, not without losses, not without adaptations and help and acceptance of limitations, but still worthwhile, still meaningful, still one's own, still a life, not just existence, still aging on personal terms rather than institutional terms, still human, still whole, still mattering, still having value that extends beyond capability or productivity. Still being a full person deserving of respect and dignity and agency. And that's possible. More possible than the culture suggests. More possible than families often realize. More possible than the immediate leap to nursing homes acknowledges. It requires thought and creativity and flexibility and community and support and acceptance. But it's possible. And worth fighting for, worth advocating for, worth protecting, because autonomy matters, because dignity matters, because how someone ages matters. Because the last years of life deserve the same respect and care and honor as any other years. Deserve choices and agency and control. Deserve life lived rather than life managed. Deserve being seen as the full human person someone has always been rather than just a body requiring care. You are not a burden. Those of you aging, those of you helping someone age, those of you facing these questions. You're not a burden. You're a life that still matters. A life with value that transcends capability. A life deserving of dignity and autonomy and respect. Your preferences still matter. Your comfort still matters. Your desires about how to live and age still matter. Your need for control over your own life still matters. Your humanity still matters. And aging doesn't take any of that away unless it's surrendered, unless it's given up, unless someone stops fighting for it. And it doesn't have to be surrendered. It can be protected, can be maintained, can be honored. Through adaptation and support and creativity and respect. through honoring the person's voice, through balancing safety with autonomy, through understanding that risk is part of life at any age and that complete safety at the cost of complete autonomy isn't actually better, through letting people choose, through supporting those choices, through aging becoming something done with people rather than done to them. If these reflections brought clarity, brought comfort, brought a different way of thinking about aging and autonomy and what's possible, I would be so grateful if you took a moment to leave a like and subscribe. There are more honest conversations here, more truths about aging and living and what makes life meaningful, more stories about the paths less taken, more reminders that dignity and agency can persist even in difficult circumstances, more voices insisting that how we age matters and that we deserve choices about it. Thank you for being here, for listening, for staying, for caring about these questions that touch all of us eventually, for wanting something better than what's often offered, for believing that aging can be done differently, more gently, more autonomously, more humanely. May it be so for all of us when our time comes.